So we'll really get into the details of this new platform that we're going to be rolling out here, and I'll just dive right in and start talking with you about it, and then I'll turn it over to our directors here who have really been building and will be managing the system moving forward, so they can tell you more about that and give you a demonstration. So we'll talk a little bit about the historical perspective. I touched on this morning, but there's a few new people in the room, so I'll briefly touch on it again, tell you a little bit about this novel approach that we've taken and why. And then we'll dig into a little bit of discussion about the basic architecture of what it is we're building before we do the demonstration, and then talk about the process. So again, as we said earlier, our past experiences really mirror those of other organizations like ours, in that building registries has traditionally been a one-off kind of endeavor, where everybody who comes along has unique needs. There isn't sort of a standard platform that's available, like, if a clinician comes and says, I'd like an electronic medical record, we don't build a new one every time. We say, well, we have an electronic medical record. We started to think about this the same way, because really to date, as is the case in a lot of aspects of research, we really do a lot of one-off building. And of course, that's very costly, and it takes a long time. And the increasing demand that we have really led us to this new approach to meet what that last bullet speaks to in terms of this unmet need for something streamlined. With that, we went to our colleagues at the CCTS. We put forward this proposal, and over the last year we've been building upon technologies that had been developed here for a long time in order to create what you're going to see. So what is this new approach? This new approach is about leveraging IHIS, leveraging the data that we're collecting clinically, an ability to really pull data from the repositories that are fed by our electronic health record, namely our information warehouse, and Clarity, which is the operational database that sort of derives most directly from the electronic health record. Every night it's updated, and essentially it's a copy of what's in IHIS. And the pipeline allows us to take data from there as we define it, and take additional data that isn't in the electronic health record, and really combine those two. That second bullet is really about that other part. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very important to recognize that not everything we want to do for research can or should be in the medical record. And so if it can't or shouldn't be in there, where does it come from? Does it exist already in some source? If so, we may need to collect from there. But more often than not, our experience is that a lot of what we need to collect for a particular research endeavor is not being collected anywhere just yet. And so we need a place to collect it. REDCap, which is the research electronic data capture tool that we have here that's standard, that many hundreds of institutions now have adopted, allows us to do that relatively easily. And there are forms, and I'll show you an example, that increasingly are being used for research purposes: patient-reported outcomes, disease activity measures, depression inventories, you name it. A lot of different things that sometimes are in the medical record, but more often than not are being collected separately, that we can actually use a tool like REDCap for, but then readily bring that into our common platform. And that gets to the last bullet, which is, what about this common platform? What's the purpose of all this? The idea is we've got data coming from different sources. Necessarily, from our perspective as informaticians, we look at that and say, well, these are in different standards. They're different languages and different vocabularies that are being used to store this. We can't necessarily just mash all this together and make sense of it. The way we do that is we map everything to a common model. That common model, think of it as a Rosetta Stone. It's essentially our way of translating from whatever the particular source system is to something common. Why do we need to do that? We need to do that because without mapping everything to a common model, we wouldn't be able to run a query across multiple different systems, data, and actually retrieve something that makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of value to having this standard. Now, a lot of what we need to collect in research isn't standardized, doesn't exist in a model. So we have ways of mapping that as well. At the end of the day, what really matters is that we've got everything then pulled from different source systems into a common database that then you as the researcher can interact with and perform the kind of research activities you need to perform. The data that get pulled in are only the data that you're approved to use, that are appropriate to that population, et cetera. I mentioned also, and I'll reiterate it here with a little bit more detail, registries are not necessarily the solution for everything that we need to do, right? There are many other ways to get at data. And sometimes a registry is the right thing to do, and sometimes it's not. This is our attempt at just a high-level sort of representation of the kinds of things you can do with the various information resources that we have. So you can see there on the left-hand column, you've got activities like performing aggregate counts or feasibility analyses. That's the sort of thing that's very good to do with the data warehouse, right? Go in there, tell me, how many patients do I have that looks like this in this population? I'm putting together a grant proposal, what have you. You don't need a registry for that. The warehouse is the way to go. De-identified or limited data sets, like via the Honest Broker Protocol. You heard about that earlier. Great thing, again, to use the IW for. We don't have it on here, but you will hear more later this year about a tool that we're going to be rolling out called I2B2 that's going to enable us to put in your hands the ability to do self-service de-identified queries to identify those cohorts. That's going to be coming later this year, and that's something that, again, we will have a tool for. It won't be necessary to create a registry to be able to do that. But you do start to get into when you start to get into identified data, when you start to get into the need for longitudinal data rather than a snapshot in a given point in time, when you start to talk about needing to aggregate from multiple sources in a continuous way and do things that are a bit more sophisticated, that's where registries start to make sense. And you can see from the spreadsheet here that we've sort of started to map this out. Importantly, though, that's what we're here to help with. So you think you need a registry, you think you might need a data mart, you think you might just need to use REDCap, what have you, just come in through the portal and our experts will work with you and sort out what is the best solution to the task. In terms of the kinds of data we can get, one of the things that we've been working toward, and we've got to start, and as we'll talk about, the purpose of this pipeline and this strategy is that we are beginning from point zero today, where we've already done some work of mapping in common data elements that the majority of researchers need. So you can think of these as sort of patient-level data and provider or clinic-level data, and these are just some examples of the kinds of things that we can already pull in, okay? So demographic information, age, gender, race, ethnicity, to the extent that it's collected, it's in the system, we can pull it. Condition occurrence data, so diagnosis codes, medical claims data, death record information. This becomes very important for certain kinds of research, obviously. Encounter information about what patient was seen where and when and by whom, and the locations they're in, including the locations where they live. Well, we can get that information. Some of that's demographics, some of that's care. And then medications, drug exposure. We have lists of providers and what provider has been seeing a given patient. Care sites, we know particular care sites where people have been cared for. Observations of general kinds, laboratories being the most common example, test results, including from medical claims, but also from our laboratory systems. Chief complaints, general clinical findings, et cetera. And then we've got periods of observation that we can also pull in that span time. So, we want to know over time what's happened, as well as procedures. So these are just high-level categories of the kinds of things that we can pull in already from the medical record, all right? So if you come to us and say, I need a cohort, I need to start a registry of patients who have rheumatoid arthritis, and I need their laboratory information and their medications and the demographic information, we probably won't need to do much custom development now, right? That's kind of the idea, is now we have sort of a standard way of doing this. On the other hand, you come to us and say, well, there's some additional data elements that we're not collecting now, and we've got to create a form. It should be in the medical record. We've got to create a form. We've got to start collecting it, and we are. And then we want to map that. Okay, we can do that too, but that's going to take a little bit of custom development. The nice thing about that, though, is, let's say that one of the things we do in rheumatology is we document tender joint count. So how many of your joints when you came in to see me with arthritis were tender today? Okay, and we have a standard way of measuring that. Orthopedists might care about that too. Now we've already got it in the system that we've got a field for tender joint count because we created it for the rheumatologist. The orthopedists come along and say, we'd like a registry as well. We'd like to capture tender joint count. Okay, well, we already mapped it for the rheumatologist. Now it's available to you, orthopedist, and we don't have to do that custom development again. Part of the benefit of having this pipeline and having this group that's going to be doing this is we're going to grow this compendium of data elements over time. So what is standard and what is custom will sort of shift over time, right? Right now we've got so much standard and some more custom. The more we sort of insert into the standard bucket, the more efficient, effective, and cheap it's going to be for everybody who comes down the road. So as we grow this, we expect that it's going to get better and bigger and cheaper for everyone. These are some examples. Now, again, not all data can or should be in the electronic medical record. There are a variety of patient-reported outcome measures, of disease activity measures, and the like. This is an article that's now 10 years old, but it was an article from our informatics community that demonstrated the effort that went into creating a library of data elements from standard forms, and you see a list of them there: the brief interview for medical status, the continuity assessment record and evaluation, et cetera. If you go down further, the PHQ-9, patient health questionnaire 9, patient health questionnaire 2, et cetera. We've got a number of them there. And those, there was already work done by groups to map those data elements to OMOP, right, to this model that we use. Since that's already been done, we don't need to redo that work. We can take that information, we can map it to LOINC, which is the laboratory standard that's part of OMOP, and in relatively short order, and we have an example of this for our demo, we can stand up that form within REDCap, we can map those elements to LOINC, which is already part of the model, and now we've cut down the amount of time it took to do custom development significantly. So to the extent that these forms exist, we're going to keep inventories of them, we're going to have them available. Next researcher that comes along that says, I need a PHQ-9, we're going to be able to take it off the shelf, put it in place, and we're not going to have to do a whole lot of custom work for that individual. So even on the non-IHIS side, we're going to be growing that library of capabilities that we have. Again, faster, less costly. This is an example. So for the purposes of the demonstration, and we're using a mock, if you will, fake research study for the purposes of this demonstration today, although some of the data we're pulling in are actually real data, but you're not going to see any identifiers, of course. One of the things we wanted to do was show in a prototypical study that we could pull in data not only from IHIS, and you'll see, I'll describe in a moment what the cohort is, but also forms. So this is a promise forms. These were forms, patient-reported outcome measure forms that were developed as part of an NIH initiative. There's a whole range of them. And these forms, again, are already easy to link to LOINC, to the laboratory standard that we have in our model. Our group, and Omkar and Josh can tell you how long it took, but our group relatively easily stood up, pulled in a form, modified it a bit from the REDCap library, did a little bit of work to map that to LOINC, and in relatively short order, now we've got a live form in REDCap that you can fill out, as a researcher, if it makes sense for you to point it directly at the patient, for them to fill it out via a survey, they can do it. It goes into REDCap, and then we can pull that information in, merge it with their IHIS information, and now in a common database, we've got information that's coming from IHIS about these patients and coming from these REDCap forms. At a very high level, the basic architecture of what we're doing is as follows. We've got, again, those two sources to start with. I say to start with because in the future, we may in fact find that there's value in bringing in additional data sources. Right now, we're starting with those two. We feel like that's the 80-20 rule, right? This is going to get us 80% of what we need, and then we can start to tackle other things down the road. But we've got IHIS, and that ETL bar is extract, transform, and load. This is a common way of describing what it is we do when we take data from one system and put it into another. So we extract it, we transform it to the common model, and then we load it into the new database. We do that with IHIS. We do that with REDCap. Nightly basis, for instance, we can run that. It goes into our common portal, and then the investigator, you, have a query portal, and you'll see this demonstrated here in a moment, that allows you to interact with those data, okay? This is a more complex representation, but it's the same idea. In this particular case, that IHIS information we're actually taking from our information warehouse. We have secure data transfer to our database. Same thing with REDCap. And then we've got, potentially others, the mappings, for instance, our shared models, et cetera, that exist here. We also have, in addition to the researchers, importantly, and this was alluded to earlier, it's very important to recognize that some of what you're going to need is, as a research team, is to have biostatisticians and other people having access to this information potentially, and we can enable all of that. And then you can run queries against this. So for our demonstration, and I'll turn it over to Omkar now, and then Josh will talk to you about the process and next steps. We created this prototype, if you will, fake research project for illustration purposes. What did we do? We took a cohort of patients with diabetes mellitus. We just said over the last year. I'm sorry, over the last month, because it's a, for the purposes of demonstration. I think and Omkar will show you the numbers. We brought in thousands of patients that were seen in our system over the last month with a diagnosis code of diabetes type 2. And we brought in some key information, including other diagnoses, basic laboratory tests, and their diabetes medications. We then created SF10 results in that red cap form, and we just populated that with, again, fake data, and pulled that in, merged it together as if we had this on the entire cohort. And what Omkar is going to show you is ways to interact with the data from the front end, extract it, and then be able to do analyses with it. Okay? So I'll turn it over to Omkar.
Okay. So give me a second while I set this up. Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I'm going to borrow a lot of... okay, cool. So I had... this is the query portal. I just logged in. You would have individual accounts, and then we can set up privileges accordingly. So this is for me. This is my account. I've logged in. We briefly talked about the architecture of the system. I'll just go over it very briefly once again, which is basically you have your IHIS, IW data, and then you have your REDCap data. There is an ETL process. There's a bunch of processes that run to bring this data into a common data model. We call it the OMOP data model. On top of which we have the query portal, which is kind of running queries against that common data model. And this is the query portal. I'm going to show you the different features of the query portal, and then we'll run a couple of queries and see how you can actually extract data from it. And then we can go from there. So the first aspect here is at the top, the one that I'm highlighting right now. That's where you can actually configure the different data service. What a data service is an endpoint. The database that we talked about, like the common data model, that's the data service for all practical purposes right now. You can actually, depending on how your account is configured, you can have access to different registries. So you can have access to different data services. So this is the diabetes registry. So you have access to a diabetes registry, and we've named it the registries data service. You can have potentially other registries as well to which you have access to, and they would show up here. So you can go there, configure, and then you can just select those, and then you would be running queries against that registry. So you can do those configurations here. The tool actually is developed to run across institutions as well. So it doesn't apply to our discussion today, but if it is deployed across institutions, you can actually configure it there as well. The second section here is the type of queries you can run. So there are three basic types. One is the common, which is what we call as a pre-canned query. So you can actually build a query, and if you know that you're going to run this query often, you can actually just name that query and have it show up. So it's more like a library of queries that you kind of run often. Maybe I should use the word search criteria, which is probably what researchers are more familiar with. So when I say a query, it is a search criteria. The second type is custom, wherein you can actually, this opens up a complicated, looks complicated, but it's actually quite simple. So you have all the data elements that Peter was talking about earlier on the left, and then you can mix and match and define values for different things. For instance, if you have, let's take a person. So if you say a person, I want to see all the people with race value of something or year of birth less than 1980 or something of that. So and you can actually mix and match different parameters from all of these attributes right here, and that's basically what forms your query or the search criteria. And then when you say submit, you actually are running that criteria. The third type is an expert mode. I'm going to skip over it right now, but if you're really, really interested in technically writing the query as an XML, then you can actually go into the expert mode. It's just a XML editor. You can put in your XML, and then you can build your own search criteria there. But I'm guessing that doesn't apply to this audience. But if you have to, you can do that as well. So for the purposes of for the purposes of a demo, like Peter mentioned earlier, we have 1 month worth of the diabetes cohort, which have the labs that Peter had in the presentation. We got about 5.3 million labs for those for that cohort. The cohort size is about 9,500 patients, which had a last visit within the last month, and we have about 2 million drugs associated with those patients. So that's like the cohort that we are dealing with right now, just to kind of give you an overview of that. So what we would do is we would actually build up 2 queries that I'm going to demonstrate. The first one is for the cohort that I just described. It is the diabetes cohort. I put in an age restriction of anyone who is greater than 18 years of age, and then is a female and has a creatinine value of 1.5 or greater. So that's that's the search criteria that I've kind of encoded, and that's the pre-kind query I'm going to run. So I'm just going to say submit, and let's. It takes a little bit of time to run because I just described it. It's quite a bit of data. It will return in just a bit. Let's give it a little bit. In the meantime, I can describe what the different options here are. You have basically an option to download your results. It gives you like 4 different, I guess, types to download. You can download it in different formats. You can actually download it in an Excel format as well. So the results, you can open it up in Excel and do further analysis on. You can rerun your search criteria as well. So if you kind of have ran it in the past, you see all the history right here in the third tab right here. You can choose one and then rerun it. And if you are actually using the criteria builder that I showed you to build your own custom query, you can save it as well. So as you can see, it just completed. So we have the search criteria of diabetes, age greater than 18, gender is female, and creatinine greater than 1.5. Query just complete. So I'm going to click on the view results, and it should show me the results. Right here, there is. So that cohort resulted in about 1,200 patients. And you can see this is all de-identified. So even the dates are all obfuscated. So I can show you this right now. But that's the cohort. So we have the diabetes cohort as 9,500 patients. With this search criteria, we've narrowed it down to a 1,200 patient cohort. You can actually click on any one of these, but let's wait for to run another query. So the next one is the search criteria that we had right now, which is again diabetes, age, gender, creatinine. I added another couple of parameters to it, which is I restricted it. So the patients who have had metformin, insulin, or glipizide as one of the drugs that were prescribed, or the patients were on those as another level of search criteria. So this should even further restrict our results. So we had 9.5K or 9,500 patients as a diabetes cohort. Then we had 1,200 patients as the first search criteria, and then the third one is this one, which I'm going to run. And let's see. So let's wait for the query to run. We'll see what the cohort size looks like, and then I'll actually open up one of the patient's details to see what other information we see correspondingly. So let's just wait for this to finish. And you can see, I've been playing around, so you can see a lot of queries being run. You can actually go ahead and run any of those as well, rerun any of those. And like I said, you can save them as well. So let's just kind of wait for this to finish. So that finished. I'm going to kind of click on the view results and see. So now that restricted the results even further down. Now we are about 500 patients, 449. I'm going to click on any, I mean, you can click on any one of these to get more information. So I'm going to click on, let's say, this one. And you have all the different information that you have gathered from IHIS and REDCap into your common data model. So you can see that you have, let's say, medications that we mentioned, we talked about. So these are all the medications that were assigned, associated with that patient over the past month. Then we have the clinical data, which is all the, and this is probably more of interest to folks here. This is the clinical data. These are all the tests, and I mean, you can see there's like a hemoglobin test, there's a creatinine tests. We have the cohort going for creatinine greater than 1.5, and here it is 4, so obviously this is valid. There's a bunch of others. You can see the promise scores also showing up here. Of course, you can even write specific queries to just get what you want. I mean, you don't have to look at all of this, but if you know what you're looking for, you can kind of build the query to just give me WBC values for these patients or have restrictions around that. So what I did was I actually used the same functions to download, like I mentioned before, you can actually download CSV, XML, the results in different formats, and then you can kind of use them and plug it into your favorite processing programs. I mean, the most basic thing is obviously MS Excel. So I actually did download, and I had it running on my machine, but I'm just going to see if it kind of works good here. So I downloaded a cohort. So I downloaded a cohort with creatinine values greater than 1.5 and hemoglobin HA1C values greater than 9, and tried to plot it. How do you actually zoom out here? There you go. Okay, so that's slightly better. Okay, so I just plotted those values. I'm not really, and I'm not a clinician, so I'm kind of, I plotted the graph with sorted creatinine values and the hemoglobin values right there. So that's an example of so this is based off. So this is actually real data, but it's all de-identified. So this is all real data, but de-identified over the past month. And then for a sample, we also have this, which is, let me zoom out again. I apologize. I had prepared on my machine, but okay. So this is so these are basically the promise scores for all the patients. So like Peter mentioned, we populated the promise data. That's fake data, but the lab data is real data. So promise forms were filled up, and then I downloaded the same from the query portal. And then just imported it in Excel and just created a graph for creatinine values versus promise scores. So I mean, these are just to kind of give you examples of what kind of analysis you can run. You can do obviously much more and meaningful stuff with it, but these are just for your information example. So I think that kind of sums up the technical demonstration. I think Josh is the next one.
Very brave doing a live demo in front of an audience. It's good. Thank you, Omkar. So I realize I am the last speaker between you and lunch, and thank you all for kind of sticking around here. All right. So I'm just going to briefly walk through the request process with some additional information. Each of you should have a packet in front of you, which includes most of the information I'm going to be walking over in the next 5 to 10 minutes. And then I'll leave some time for questions for us. So as with all of our services, begin with the computerized research record, define a project in there. As of this morning, there's a new request type, which is research registry. Service requests will be reviewed. As Peter mentioned earlier, there's various ways to go about producing a data set for various types of research. And so we will be looking to make sure that the research requests, or the research registry requests that come in are valid for the pipeline that we've put together. The triage process will require close coordination with the research team, and so this is not a request it and forget it type of thing. There will be many meetings between various stakeholders, both on the Biomedical Informatics, CCTS, and research team side. Just a note on regulatory, through the process, we really cannot start ETL development because we are looking at real data until the IRB approval has been obtained. And of course, registries are meant to be longitudinal in nature, and so your continuing review must be obtained in order to maintain access to your registry. This is taken directly from one of the handouts in terms of the overall process and timeline. I'm just going to briefly mention that we're looking at a 4 to 6 month window. So historically, some of the larger registries we've done have taken multiple years, up to, I believe, 2 years to really, from concept to deployment. And so this is a very condensed timeline. This, of course, assumes close coordination and collaboration with the research teams.
It's important to point out you've included the IRB time in that timeline.
Right, that's correct. So the overall process, the base build includes some technical pieces. There's 3 project-specific servers that are created, and that's based on historical experience working with registries. It's a pretty standard technical architecture. A REDCap project creation, we assume that each of our registries will require research data collected outside of the medical record. And so that is included in the kind of base build. As Peter had mentioned, the on-menu items, so the standard items that we have in our menu, so to speak, which are standard and available to every registry. And then a year of hosting. We are utilizing the medical center, data center for hosting these services, so those are within a secure environment. The estimated cost, we're looking at a $10,000 cost for deployment. As Peter had mentioned earlier, CCTS vouchers may be available. We're in discussions currently. So for non-standard items, there'll be discussions between the teams to identify what is in scope for the project that is not within the standard menu. Additional costs, of course, will be incurred for providing those items into the registry. An annual hosting fee to help cover the cost of server and maintenance. And then any post-deployment changes, so changes to the types of data being collected or to the protocol that require our assistance would be quoted back to you as requested. So our plan for the next 4 to 6 months, looking for a core set of early adopters, one of which we've actually already identified. We'd like to go through the process focusing on that small number and then open it up kind of in general later on this summer after we have some experience under our belt rolling out these types of registries. And in that same time frame, working with the CCTS regulatory core and various other stakeholders in terms of smoothing out the process for gaining IRB approval and ensuring that the kind of templates that we've created for inclusion in the various protocols make sense and are actually making it through the process.